Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today's video highlights one more identified Confederate portrait that I scanned at the recent Civil War show for collectors in Franklin, Tennessee. This is the third of three images I've shared from the show, and it happens to be the only one that has a connection to the Battle of Franklin. Now, you students of the Civil War know that the Battle of Franklin, fought on November 30th, 1864 in Tennessee, turned out to be one of the bloodiest engagements of the Civil War. The aggressive Confederate General John Bell Hood's army, about 27,000 strong, launched a powerful frontal assault against Union forces, numbering about the same number, 27 to 31,000, and commanded by Major General John Schofield. Despite ferocious fighting and initial breakthroughs, Hood's forces were ultimately devastated, suffering catastrophic losses with over 6,000 casualties, including 12 generals and many officers. Schofield's army, protected in strong defensive positions, repelled the attack and afterwards withdrew to nearby Nashville. Hood's defeat at Franklin dramatically weakened his Army of Tennessee, which was effectively destroyed about 2 weeks later at the Battle of Nashville. One of the officers who fought at Franklin is pictured here, and it's part of the collection of a longtime collector, Paul Reeder. This soldier's name is Bib C. Garner, and he served as a first lieutenant in the 5th Mississippi Infantry. In this portrait, he wears an officer's frock coat with the proper insignia of 2 bars along his collar, and you can also see this trim on his sleeves. Also note his circular belt buckle. If you look very closely, you'll see the letters CS for Confederate States embossed in the center. The letters shown here read backwards because of a technical issue, a reversal effect that was common to tintypes and ambrotypes of this period. He also wears a simple dark hat and holds a sword, a unique looking sword that's worthy of further research. One other note, if you look at his hair on our left, it looks like there's some sort of a piece of fabric or patch covering it, and it's not that. It's a retoucher's paintbrush, some black ink that was added by the photographer, probably to darken it up a little bit, or maybe there was a scratch or a problem with the development chemicals. Anyway, let's talk a little bit more about Bib Garner. He was born in Alabama and a resident of Noxubee County in Mississippi when the war began. Then he joined his local militia company, the Noxubee Blues, as a sergeant. The Blues became Company H of the 5th Mississippi when it mustered in for state service. Garner soon advanced to second lieutenant, and on July 1st, 1863, to first lieutenant, which is how we see him here. And that also means that July 1st, 1863 date is the earliest time that this portrait could have been taken. Now, Garner and his comrades fought in major operations in the Western Theater, including the Battle of Shiloh, Siege of Corinth, the battles of Stones River and Chickamauga, and the Atlanta Campaign. Garner survived it all without physical injury, and he also emerged from the Battle of Franklin without wounds. But his war service ended days later. After the fighting of Franklin, just after the fighting, on December 5th, he was captured near Nashville, sent to Johnson's Island, Ohio, where other Confederate officers were held, and remained a prisoner of war until he signed the Oath of Allegiance to the Constitution on June 16th, 1865, making him one of the Confederates who resisted rejoining the Union and becoming a citizen until it was abundantly clear that the Confederate military resistance had been completely eliminated. Now, I found a news report that mentions Garner's capture on Monday, December 5th, 1864, along with 16 of his men. They were captured by the 14th and 16th United States Colored Infantries. He's not mentioned by name, but you'll see how the reference is made to the 5th Mississippi. The story appeared in the December 6th edition of the Nashville Union. That's a local newspaper. I want to read the entire report because it will give you a very real sense of the tensions and the precarious nature of the situation in Union-occupied Nashville. So here we go. In our last, the report begins, we presented the readers of the Union with a view of affairs in and around Nashville up to Saturday night. Sunday morning opened clear and cold. The usual Sabbath quiet was disturbed by the arrest of citizens on the street, by the guards for the purpose of increasing the force at work on the defenses of the city. So we're impressing civilians. Hundreds who had gone out on the streets for recreation were picked up and escorted without a why or a wherefore to the scene of shovels and picks. Many cases of flagrant injustice occurred in the forcible seizure of gentlemen in feeble health, unable to wield a spade or anything else, and hurrying them along the streets without regard to consequences. It seems to us that there ought to be a discretion given to guards to prevent such abuses. Outside of the scenes growing out of this impressment, the city was about as quiet as usual on the Sabbath. On the lines of the army around the city, there was considerable skirmishing. The rebels were evidently determined to press nearer to the city, but their movements were closely watched and provoked in repeated instances through shelling. Dr. Buckley's residence on the Middle Franklin Pike, having become a resort for rebel sharpshooters, was shelled and torn to pieces. A private residence on the Hillsborough Pike, between the lines of the two armies, occupied by females, became a dangerous place, and during the afternoon, a shell dropped into it, doing much damage, but fortunately injuring none of the occupants, who vacated at once and came to the city. A cavalry fight occurred on this pike, in which the rebels were gently thrashed and sent off in a hurry. Cannonading was kept up until after dark. Amongst the points that received attention from the cannoneers, we learn, was the residence of Mr. Joseph Vaux on the Franklin Pike, rebels having collected there. Yesterday, the morning opened foggy, and at an early hour, cannonading was heard at various points on our extended line. At 10 o'clock a.m., the 14th and 16th U.S. Colored Troops, under Colonel Morgan, the 16th Indiana Dismounted Cavalry, and the 68th Indiana, under Colonel Biddle, made a reconnaissance by the direction of Major General Stedman between the Chicken and Murfreesboro pikes. They advanced with gallantry across the hill on which Felix R. Rains resides and drove the enemy from their entrenchments, capturing a first lieutenant of the 5th Mississippi and 16 men. So there you have the capture of Garner right here. The 5th Mississippi and 16 men. The colored troops came within a few yards of capturing Generals Frank, Cheatham, and Lowry, who secured their escape by the fleetness of their horses. The lieutenant confirms the death, and now this is a quote from Garner. The lieutenant confirms the death of General Pat Claiborne at the recent Battle of Franklin and says General Cheatham is in command of the division. He also says, again, this is Garner talking, he says the rebel troops have been assured that Sherman has been whipped, but they do not believe it because they know Beauregard and Dick Taylor, that's Richard Taylor, have not the men to do that job. He says also that his brigadier lost 2/3 of his command at Franklin. the object of the reconnaissance having been accomplished, the command returned to their respective positions and were complimented by General Stedman upon the handsome manner in which they had executed his order. The story continues. Amongst the sympathizers with the rebellion, there were numerous rumors in circulation, the most important of which were relative to reinforcements said to have been received by the enemy. We do not regard them as worth mentioning, although it is plain that this class of our citizens place implicit confidence in them, and we could detect in their mien and deportment something of a spirit of exultation, not witnessed since the transit of Buell, that's Don Carlos Buell, in 1862 when he left Nashville. They evidently expected something favorable to their cause. On the other hand, Union citizens are cool and confident. Of course, this is a pro-Union newspaper. They know that the feeling of our lines by the enemy by skirmishing is no indication he is able to meet our forces or even to develop them. And we may add, at no time has the confidence of our troops been greater or the substantial reasons for such confidence so strong. We do not anticipate any attack in force on our present front, as, independent of the advantageous disposition of our troops and the spirit of the men on the advanced line, we are satisfied no rebel commander is foolhardy enough to risk an attack against any portion of the Union position. Keep in mind, this is December 6th. A week and a half later, Hood is going to make another attack and lose, be completely defeated in what became known as the Battle of Franklin. So let me finish up. The story continues. Franklin, on a lesser scale, proves how fruitless the offensive can be taken by a force presumably equal or even overbalanced by one half. So, granting that the rebels have the preponderance in numbers claimed for them, still, we cannot believe their leader seriously meditates an assault on Nashville. Hood has shown himself rash, if not desperate, and his men may be equally so, but he has had sore experience enough to cure him of this folly. So there you have the story of Bibb Garner, 1st Lieutenant, 5th Mississippi, his capture by the 14th and 16th U.S. Colored Infantries on December 5th, 1864, and a little bit of information that the newspaper reports Garner gave the Union authorities after his capture. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Oh, before I stop, one more detail. You might wonder what became of him. Well, he lived a long life, dying in 1910 in Macon, Mississippi. He was about 70 years old, and he died of Bright's disease. So now, the end of the video. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.